Well, it's a 4-dog night. Well, it's going to be a 4-dog night. It's winter, and it's wet, and it's cold. And in the old days, people used concepts like a 3-dog night or a 4-dog night to determine how cold it was. You know, you needed 4 dogs to survive that night, or 3 dogs, you know, in your sleeping quarters wherever you're sleeping. But this raises the issue of energy, and this is the issue that's on everybody's minds and lips. Energy production. Winter sees increased need for heating. And the quite extraordinary thing is that in a country as rich as Australia, that there will be people watching this YouTube presentation, or people watching this YouTube presentation who know people who basically go to bed early because they can't afford heating. And what we've seen over the last 40 years is the privatisation of energy production across Australia. We've seen energy sources which were owned by state governments and the federal government being sold to the private sector. And we were sold this pup on the understanding that prices would decrease. Obviously prices haven't decreased, because prices never decrease when you privatise a public service, because obviously a public service is subsidised by the taxpayer. A private corporation needs to make a profit to survive. So every time something is privatised, prices will always increase. Maybe not in the first year, but over the next few years they will increase quite dramatically. And now we are seeing this issue in Australia. Not only do we have the privatisation of energy production, we also have privatisation of the distribution lines, privatisation of the organisations which actually you buy your energy from. Now, obviously the climate emergency due to increased CO2 emissions due to fossil fuel burning have compounded the issue of energy stability and energy production. And what we are seeing now is the rise of green capitalism. What I mean by green capitalism is the domination of energy production by privately owned corporations who are quite happy to invest in renewable energy, especially large centralised renewable energy sources, because they understand that by dominating the marketplace, whether it's fossil fuel or renewable energy, wind, solar, water, is irrelevant. What's relevant is the profits that can be made by corporatising energy production. So that's the issue. Now, people will go cold this winter because they can't afford to buy that energy. That's not an issue that is just related to those people who don't have the disposable income to pay for energy, or have to make sacrifices regarding food or rent in order to survive. But this is an issue for the whole of society, because the way we are moving forward as far as energy production and distribution is concerned is down the old-fashioned way of private investment for private profit. And what that means is that the opportunity, the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity we are currently experiencing in terms of energy production, energy sufficiency, energy oversupply, that opportunity that we face as a society will be squandered with the takeover of green energy production by large corporations who will build large solar farms, large dams, large wind farms which they own and which they control. Now it's time that we looked at something a little bit more suitable for us in the 21st century. The problem with centralised energy production is that there's not only a cost factor, but the factor that these few corporations that dominate that marketplace hold the country at ransom. Because in the 21st century, energy production is central to the type of society we live in. You cannot wake up or go to bed in this country today without using energy in various ways. Just doing this YouTube is about energy use. So instead of looking at the corporatisation of green energy, we should be looking at community government partnerships to create decentralised energy production, which satisfies the needs of communities. On top of that, we also have to look at centralised energy production, which is publicly owned for large industries. But ultimately, any society which privatises its water, as we have done, any society which privatises its energy production facilities, which we have done, any society which privatises telecommunications, healthcare, education, government public services at the state and federal level, is basically abrogating their responsibility to the people they supposedly govern. For far too long, governments have been able to get away with this because we haven't faced a critical emergency. Now that we face a critical emergency, it's time that we look at other mechanisms of delivering energy which are decentralised, locally controlled, have a minimal footprint on the environment, and provide the necessary energy for societies to function. This is a much better situation than having centralised energy production sources which are owned by a handful of corporations, which we are currently seeing occurring in society today. No private organisation, privately owned organisation, whether owned by an individual or shareholders, should be in the position of dictating how that society will function, because they control the essential part of that society, which is energy production. So think about it. Now already we are seeing a small number of communities attempting to set up their own decentralised energy sources, whether it's a small wind farm, whether it's a small solar farm, whether it's solar panels which are connected to a local grid. But unfortunately, these examples are few and far between, and they are few and far between because of the lack of seeding funding. And that's what I talk about. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about community government partnerships, whether it's at a local government level, a state government level, a federal government level, where resources are owned by the community that uses them as well as the government of the day. A joint partnership which benefits everybody. It benefits that particular community because of energy security. It benefits society as a whole because that community has energy security, and it benefits the nation as a whole. So we are now at a critical juncture as far as the development of energy resources are concerned? Do we continue to make the same mistakes? Do we continue to have the ridiculous situation where there is not enough gas on the east coast of Australia, where we're the second largest exporter of gas on the planet, because all the gas has been forward sold and nobody made any allowances for gas on the east coast to be reserved for use? Do we need to have hundreds of privately owned corporations and businesses running the distribution network, the sale network, the production network, duplicating services that could be provided by a community public partnership as far as energy production is concerned? So we need to start thinking in a different way, and especially if you live in a regional area, especially if you are relying on a private corporation to provide that energy security. And with the phasing out of fossil fuel production because of the negative impact it has on society, we have now reached a situation where we can make decisions about the type of energy sources we want. Not just broad decisions about whether it's going to be solar or wind or water or hydrogen, but more specific, localised decisions about how it's produced, where it's produced, the fact that it is decentralised. So that means local communities have control over their energy sources. For us to continue down this path is a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for disaster because it puts in the hands of a few corporations something which is essential for postmodern living, and that is energy. Whether it's simple things like heating and cooling and cooking, or more complex things like the World Wide Web, manufacturing, transport, and the list goes on and on. These are real issues that need decisions which need to be made rapidly. And unless there is a push for decentralised energy sources, which are community publicly owned, unless there is a push at the local level, what we'll see is the domination of energy production by the same old corporations which has given us the current climate emergency. What we are seeing is these corporations divesting themselves of their fossil fuel investments and rapidly moving into green energy production. But green energy production based on a centralised model which they own and control. Unless we start thinking outside the current examples which are being used to promote green capitalism, private investment for private profit in the energy sector, to promote green capitalism as the solution to the climate emergency, we will find we may gain a few decades, but in the end, major decisions still have to be made about what we eat, what we produce, how we control our energy sources, how we produce energy, and how we function as a society. With the population of the Earth rapidly approaching 8 billion, and I clearly remembered when it was rapidly approaching 7 billion less than a decade ago, and with finite resources, and with an economic system based on the creation of ever-increasing profits, irrespective of the human, social and environmental costs. It's time that people like you and people like me commenced agitation to create decentralised, community, publicly owned energy production sources, and that we stand up against the corporations which gave us the fossil fuel emergency, who are now jockeying to dominate the marketplace as far as energy production, distribution and sales is concerned. It's all very well to say, check the market. It's all very well to try to obtain the cheapest cost. But unless we actually change the way we are approaching this monumental decision, unless we look at decentralised community public partnerships in terms of producing energy, we will continue to make mistakes. And although we may put forward the climate emergency a decade or two, the fact is that things will not change without a major change in the way we as societies produce energy, distribute energy. Energy should be available to all. It should be something which is publicly owned. It should be something where communities who wish to can set up, with government support at the state, local and federal level, decentralised energy systems which provide energy for their communities. Already, as I said before, a few communities have gone down that path, trying to find local finances to create that energy independence, and that's the key. It's all about independence. Independence from other people dominating energy production and using energy as a bargaining chip via which they maximise their profits at the expense of the communities they are providing energy for. Think about it. You do have options. We all have options. We need to look at these options, and if you are lucky enough to be in a position where you can go off-grid, or lucky enough to be in a position where your local community has the finances to create a decentralised energy source to give you energy security, then it's very important that we go down that path today. Not tomorrow, not in a decade, not in a century, but today. The future belongs to those organisations, those community groups who are willing to create decentralised energy sources to provide energy for local communities, with or without government support.